I had barely set foot in my quiet lake cabin when chaos hit. The door burst open, and there she was, HOA, Karen, demanding to inspect my property, her eyes blazing like she owned the place. All around me, the serene lake and peaceful forest felt like a trap, a stage for the absurd power plays that had taken over my life. And the timing. I was in the middle of a meeting with the state attorney general, trying to expose the very corruption that had allowed her to harass me for months. How far would she go to intimidate me? And what would happen if I stood my ground? Life at the lake cabin had always been simple. Weekends were spent listening to the gentle lap of water against the dock, the smell of pine drifting through the air, and the occasional laughter of friends gathered around a bonfire. My mornings started with coffee on the porch, watching mist curl across the water. And evenings ended with a soft hum of nature settling in for the night. It was a place of escape, a retreat from the endless pressures of work and city life. Our community was small but close-knit, a patchwork of families who had called these wooded shores home for decades. Everyone knew each other, or at least, they pretended to. There were rules, of course, a tangle of HOA regulations meant to maintain the perfect aesthetic of the neighborhood. Most of the time, they were harmless. A reminder here, a gentle nudge there. But beneath the polite nods and friendly waves, there were those who relished enforcing these rules with more zeal than common sense. I had met her only a few times, HOA Karen, with her sharp heels clicking like a warning bell and her eyes always scanning for what she could police next. At first, it seemed trivial. A mailbox painted slightly the wrong color, a boat parked a foot too far from the dock. Little things. But over time, the minor infractions grew into daily scrutinies. Her presence a constant shadow over what should have been our peaceful escape. And yet, nothing could have prepared me for the day she crossed the line, completely storming into my lake cabin while I was in the middle of something far bigger than her petty rules, something that could change everything. The first real sign that my peaceful retreat was under siege came with a letter. A simple envelope, crisp and official-looking, slipped under my cabin door. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming it was another routine notice about the annual community meeting or a harmless reminder about lawn care. But the moment I tore it open, my stomach sank. The letter wasn't just a reminder, it was a fine. For what? Exactly. The HOA claimed my dock was improperly aligned by a mere few inches, a violation of a rule I hadn't even known existed. The fine was steep, far beyond any small infraction, and they demanded immediate payment. I called the HOA office, trying to reason with someone, anyone who could explain how this had happened. The receptionist's voice was polite, almost sweet. But the person on the other end of the line was a brick wall of bureaucracy. Rules are rules, they said, with a tone that suggested questioning them was tantamount to heresy. I asked for evidence, for photos, for anything that justified this fine, and all I got was a vague insistence that the board had seen the misalignment personally. Days turned into weeks, and the harassment escalated. Every morning, I would wake to find another note pinned to my door or tucked under a rock on my walkway. The messages were passive-aggressive at first, reminders about paint colors, requests to trim trees before they violate aesthetic standards, and gentle hints that further infractions could lead to more severe penalties. But the tone changed quickly. Soon they were formal warnings, threats of legal action, and photographs of my property circled in red ink, with captions like "needs immediate correction" or "non-compliant structure." It felt personal, invasive, and relentless. I tried to comply, adjusting the dock, trimming the trees, repainting mailboxes, and even moving the canoe slightly closer to the shore just to stay ahead of their scrutiny. And yet, no matter what I did, there was always something new. One morning, I found a complaint claiming my fire pit smoke was disturbing the neighbors, even though it barely drifted past my own porch. Another day, they cited me for excessive birdwatching noise, A line so absurd that I laughed until tears came, but the next day's fine was real, and the deadline for payment loomed. It wasn't just the rules that frustrated me. It was the pettiness behind them. Karen seemed to delight in finding ways to control every inch of my property. She patrolled the neighborhood, her eyes scanning for the smallest imperfections. And I started to notice her appearing more often casually strolling by my cabin, sometimes with a clipboard. Other times, simply leaning on her fence, staring. Her presence felt like a shadow that grew heavier by the day. One afternoon, I returned from a short trip to find a notice stapled to my front door, more official than any before. It wasn't a warning. This time it was a summons to appear at the HOA board meeting, accused of continued non-compliance and disruptive behavior. My heart pounded. I wasn't even sure what I was supposed to say or do. The meeting was scheduled for the next day, and refusal to attend would result in escalating fines or worse legal action. I spent the night restless, replaying every minor decision I had made. The angle of the dock, the color of the mailbox, even the way I trimmed the shrubs. Nothing seemed like it could justify this level of harassment. And yet, I knew Karen wouldn't stop. She thrived on power, and the HOA gave her all the authority she needed to make my life miserable. The next morning, I entered the HOA office with a mix of dread and determination. The room was sterile, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of old carpet and disinfectant hanging in the air. Karen was there, sitting behind the board's long table like a queen in judgment. Her gaze swept over me, evaluating, dismissive, almost predatory. The other board members shuffled papers but said nothing. Karen spoke first, her voice sharp, rehearsed. "We're here to discuss your ongoing violations." I tried to speak calmly, to defend myself, to explain how minor these violations really were. But every word I uttered seemed to bounce off the wall of her authority. Every attempt to question the rules was met with more citations, more evidence, and a smirk that made my blood boil. The tension in the room was suffocating, and I realized that no logic or reason would sway her. Over the next several weeks, the harassment intensified. Notices appeared faster than I could address them. Neighbors once friendly began treating me differently, whispering in the grocery store aisles, glancing at my cabin with suspicion. It was as if Karen had poisoned the very air of the community, turning minor issues into personal attacks. Each day, my anxiety grew. I felt trapped, caught between the need to defend my home and the impossibility of satisfying someone who seemed intent on controlling everything I did. Then came the moment that shifted everything. I had been preparing for a scheduled call with the State Attorney General's office, trying to report the pattern of harassment and unfair fines. I had gathered evidence, emails, photographs, letters, and recordings of interactions with the HOA. I felt a glimmer of hope that someone with real authority might finally see the absurdity and the cruelty of what I had endured. That's when it happened. The cabin door slammed open before I could even pick up the phone. Karen was standing there, unannounced, clipboard in hand, eyes blazing. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She had crossed a line that no HOA rule could justify. My heart raced, a mix of fear and fury. What she was about to do next would change everything. But I had no idea how far she would push her power on, what consequences her actions would bring. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lake, but inside my cabin there was no light, only tension. Thick and suffocating. Karen had arrived before I could even finish my call with the State Attorney General. She didn't knock. She simply swung the door open, her heels clicking like a drumbeat of impending doom. Her eyes locked on mine, sharp and calculating, daring me to resist. Every ounce of calm I had tried to cultivate vanished in that instant. "You shouldn't be talking to the Attorney General," she said, her tone more menace than warning, as if the words alone could strip me of every right I had. The clipboard in her hand wasn't just paper, it was a weapon. Filled with months of citations, photographs, and arbitrary rules she had twisted into tools of intimidation. She stepped further into the cabin, ignoring the personal space that was mine by law and common decency. I could feel the walls closing in, the cabin that had once been my sanctuary, now a stage for confrontation. I stood my ground. I had spent weeks documenting her harassment, collecting every letter, every photo, every absurd fine, and every whispered threat. Now, armed with evidence and a deep understanding of the legal gray areas she had exploited, I refused to cower. The tension in the room was electric, a battle of wills that no words could immediately resolve. Karen's face twisted, a mixture of confusion and rage. She had underestimated me. She had thought the threat of fines, the whispers among neighbors, and the constant surveillance of my property would break me. But it had only strengthened my resolve. I calmly gestured toward the stack of documents on the table. Everything you've done, the letters, the citations, the harassment, has been recorded. I've sent copies to the Attorney General. Every fine, every rule you've twisted, every threat. And today, I'm done being intimidated. Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned closer. "You'll regret this," she hissed. But it was no longer the chilling threat it once was. It sounded hollow, almost desperate, like a villain realizing the hero might actually have the upper hand. The next moments were chaotic. Karen lunged toward the stack of documents as if she could snatch the truth away from me. But I had anticipated this. With quick hands, I shoved the papers safely out of reach and locked the cabin door behind me. She pounded on the door, yelling that I was violating HOA rules by denying board access. Each word dripping with arrogance. I ignored her, taking a deep breath, letting the absurdity of her claims fuel a simmering anger that had been building for months. And then the legal bombshell dropped. The state attorney general's office called, breaking through the tension with the voice of authority I had been hoping for. I placed the phone on speaker, letting Karen hear every word. The agent detailed an investigation into the HOA's practices, citing complaints not only from me but from multiple residents who had suffered similar harassment. Every overreach, every petty fine, every invasion of privacy was under review. The board could face significant consequences, including personal liability for abusing their power. Karen's face went pale, the first crack in her armor. The air in the cabin seemed to shift, heavy with disbelief and fear. She had never expected accountability. She had operated under the assumption that her authority was absolute, her power unchecked. But now, confronted with the weight of legal scrutiny and the undeniable evidence I had collected, her confidence faltered. Despite the legal weight, the confrontation escalated further. Karen began shouting, throwing her arms in frustration, attempting one last intimidation tactic, threatening to report me for harassment, and accusing me of violating unspecified rules that she claimed had magically appeared overnight. But I remained calm, detailing each of her threats, each fine, and every instance of documented harassment into a voice recorder. Every accusation she threw was countered with irrefutable evidence, leaving her words echoing empty in the room. The tension reached its peak when she realized I had arranged for neighbors, local media, and the Attorney General's representatives to witness the culmination of her actions. Suddenly, the very community she had policed with an iron fist was paying attention. Cameras, cell phones, and watchful eyes were present as her threats crumbled. Her carefully constructed narrative of power dissolved in the face of truth and exposure. The room that had once felt like a trap now became a stage of vindication. Every pounding heartbeat in my chest matched the sense of relief and triumph building inside me. I had faced months of relentless harassment, intimidation, and absurd legal threats, and now, finally, the balance had shifted. Karen's fury was no longer a weapon. It was a spectacle. She attempted one last gesture, trying to storm past me toward the papers on the table, but her own fear betrayed her. A neighbor stepped forward, calmly asserting their right to record the proceedings. While the Attorney General's office confirmed that every citation she had issued could now be scrutinized under state law. At that moment, I realized something profound. The struggle had never been just about the dock, the mailbox, or the paint color. It had been about power, control, and the courage to stand up against arbitrary authority. And standing my ground had exposed the absurdity and illegitimacy of her tactics for everyone to see. Karen retreated, not with grace, but with a flicker of recognition that her reign of petty terror was over, at least for now. Her clipboard, once a symbol of unchecked control, lay on the table like a relic of the past. The cabin, which had felt invaded and hostile just minutes before, now held a different energy, one of reclamation, of justice, and of hard-earned triumph. As I watched her storm out into the sunlight, muttering under her breath, I couldn't help but feel the surge of vindication. But there was still work to do. The investigation was ongoing, and the community had witnessed everything. Lives and reputations were at stake, and the ripple effects of this confrontation were only beginning. I stepped outside onto the dock, the lake reflecting the morning sky, calm as ever, despite the storm inside the cabin. For the first time in months, I felt the freedom to breathe. Yet a question lingered in my mind, sharp and persistent. Would this be enough to stop the cycle of abuse? Or was Karen already plotting her next move, waiting for another chance to assert control? And in that tense, quiet moment, I knew that the true battle was far from over. The next chapter would demand every ounce of patience, courage, and resilience I had left. The days after the confrontation felt surreal. The lake cabin, which had once been a theater of intimidation and petty power plays, began to feel like a place of quiet reclamation. Karen no longer stalked the property, at least not openly. And the stack of citations and letters that had once seemed endless now served as evidence of her overreach, neatly organized and ready for legal review. The Attorney General's office contacted me regularly, confirming that an official investigation into the HOA's practices had been launched. They examined every complaint I had submitted, cross-referenced them with those of other residents, and began scrutinizing the board's record-keeping. Suddenly, it became clear that Karen's harassment was not an isolated incident. Numerous families had quietly suffered under her rule, facing fines for minor infractions, intrusive inspections, and outright intimidation. My documentation provided the catalyst for a broader investigation that promised to hold the HOA accountable not just for me, but for everyone in the community. Even neighbors who had once avoided me now approached cautiously, some with apologies, others with relief that someone had finally challenged the oppressive authority. Now became a mirror for clarity. I thought about the countless hours spent defending a dock, a mailbox, a tree, and realized that the battle had never been about those things alone, had been about autonomy, dignity, and fairness. My cabin had become a symbol not of retreat, but of resistance. When the HOA was finally compelled to address the findings of the investigation, Karen's influence unraveled. The board was forced to retract numerous fines, issue formal apologies, and revise their policies to prevent future abuse. Karen herself faced the uncomfortable spotlight of accountability. While she remained on the board, her authority was sharply curtailed, and she was required to attend mandatory training on fair governance and ethical conduct. The neighbors who had once feared her watched as the system finally began to enforce the rules she had long ignored. The transformation extended beyond immediate legal consequences. The community slowly shifted from one of quiet compliance to cautious empowerment. Meetings were no longer arenas for intimidation, but forums for open dialogue. Residents began documenting interactions, asking questions, and asserting their rights without fear of retaliation. The culture of fear that Karen had nurtured was replaced by a sense of vigilance and mutual respect. For me personally, the experience left a lasting imprint. I had learned that documentation, patience, and persistence were powerful tools in the face of seemingly insurmountable authority. I had also discovered the importance of community solidarity. My ability to stand firm was amplified by the support of those who had quietly suffered alongside me. What had begun as a fight to protect my property evolved into a broader lesson about courage, accountability, and resilience. There were moments of lingering unease. Karen's glances during community events, the occasional whispered comment from neighbors still loyal to her, reminded me that vigilance was necessary. Abuse of power rarely disappears overnight. It mutates, waiting for complacency. But armed with knowledge, evidence, and the support of my fellow residents, I felt prepared to address future challenges head-on. The confrontation had forged a new confidence, one that would not be easily shaken. In the weeks following the official resolution, the cabin regained its role as a sanctuary. I could once again enjoy the gentle lap of the lake against the dock, the rustle of pine needles in the breeze, and the quiet reflection of the water at dusk. There was a profound sense of reclamation, not just of the physical space, but of the mental and emotional peace that had been eroded over months of harassment. The small victories, retrieved letters, corrected fines, public recognition of wrongdoing accumulated into a larger triumph. Justice, however incremental, had been served. Beyond personal vindication, the story spread within the neighborhood. It became a cautionary tale about unchecked power, the importance of following proper legal and ethical procedures, and the strength of community accountability. People began to question the HOA more critically, advocate for transparency, and document their own interactions. What once was an environment dominated by fear now fostered engagement and assertiveness. The ripple effects of standing up to Karen and the board were changing not only my life, but the culture of the entire community. Reflecting on the ordeal, I recognized an important truth: boundaries matter. Rules exist to guide fairness, not to serve as instruments of intimidation. Those entrusted with authority must wield it responsibly, and those subjected to it must not be afraid to assert their rights. My battle had been deeply personal, yet it revealed universal lessons about power, justice, and the courage to stand up for oneself. By the time summer rolled around again, the lake shimmered with calm waters and quiet reflection. The cabin was my retreat once more, not because it was untouched, but because I had reclaimed it. Every sunrise reminded me of the stakes, the struggle, and the ultimate reward, the knowledge that fear could be confronted, that absurd rules could be challenged, and that standing firm, no matter how small or isolated the act, could ripple outward to effect meaningful change. I would never forget the pounding of Karen's heels, the cold precision of her citations, or the anxiety of facing authority that seemed unshakable. But I also would never forget the surge of triumph, the empowerment of documenting injustice, and the clarity of knowing that justice, patience, and persistence could prevail. The lake cabin, once a stage for conflict, had become a monument to resilience. And as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the water in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, I couldn't help but ask myself and anyone who had followed the story this one lingering question: if standing up to arbitrary authority could change an entire community, how far would you go to defend what is rightfully yours?